Amen. What's up, guys? Well, man, hey, if you didn't get to go out to the Palo Duro trip with us, man, I got to tell you, you missed out. It was fun. It was fun. Hey, it was rainy, but it only rained 30 minutes while we were there. That 30 minutes happened to be at midnight, and one might say that it was intense. Get it? Because the rain got in the tents because it was storming. All right, moving on. So we're in a series called Plagued, and we're looking at several things that we deal with and things that we go through, and how does God respond? What does God's word have to say about those things? And tonight, just up front, I want to tell everyone we're going to be at like 10 different passages in the Bible, and so it's going to be about a 5-hour message. Hope everyone's ready. No, I'm joking. But we're going to be all around the Bible tonight, so feel free to jot some of those down as I'm tracking through them, and you people that want to keep up, feel free to try to do that as well. But the verses will be up behind me. But I want to start with a question. So who here has had a bad experience with a restaurant or a specific food, and it ruined you? It ruined the food for you like forever, okay? So a lot of us. And so for me, it's Fig Newtons, right? So Fig Newtons, whenever I was in 5th grade, first of all, like if there is a food that you have to depart from, Fig Newtons is an okay one. Can we just be honest? And so I was in 5th grade, and I went with my friend to his house, staying the night, and he introduced me to Fig Newtons, which I ate like they came in rows at that point in time. Don't know if they still do because I hate them. And so I think I ate like 2 full rows of these Fig Newtons, and I don't know if it was just too many or there was something like a bug that I got, but I got really sick that night. And to this day, when I see someone pull out a Fig Newton, I'm like, gross, you nasty, right? I'm like, get that thing away from me. It might as well be a cockroach. I'm out on Fig Newtons. Do not like them at all. And that was in 5th grade, and now over a decade later, still bothered by it. Like going on 2 decades later, still bothered by it. So it's something that just kind of goes with you throughout the rest of your life sometimes. And so I want to give you, unfortunately for me, I got to live this first illustration that I'm giving last weekend. So I'll give you a more up-to-date recent one. So for me, I go out, and at the end of a service on Sunday night, I always go and I always get fried chicken whenever I'm done. I don't really eat. I eat really clean the day, but as I'm getting ready for preaching, we really clean that day. And then I try to, kind of reward myself a little bit for not eating badly up until that point. And then it's like game time, right? It's like, let me see if I can eat 6K calories right now. And so that's what I try to do. So I went and I got the fried chicken that I always get home. My mother-in-law was in town last weekend, so I'm sitting there talking with her, eat my meal, eat my fries, eat the chicken, delish, at least I thought, and then I go to sleep. I wake up, and I woke up gagging, which is bad sign. Bad sign when it's 5 a.m. and you wake up and you're like, oh no. Oh no. And let me just tell you how bad it was. 6.5 pounds bad. So I still haven't gained the weight back. So, silver lining, if you just want to lose a few pounds, get super sick where you think you're going to die, maybe it'll happen. And so, like I told my wife, I was like, if I got hit with another round of that, like first I was in the bed and I was just curled up like groaning. Have you ever been that sick where you're like, ugh? And I was like, Carrie, this is it. Bring me a sheet of paper. I'm just letting you know that all 10 of my dollars and 1 cent belongs to you now. And I was so sick. I was like, man, I don't know. 48 hours was about the time that the bug lasted. Couldn't even get out of bed. I had to make a phone call for just getting some stuff set up for Palo Duro. I had to make another one. I couldn't do it. That's how weak I was in bed. And so you can just imagine my hatred for this place that I once loved so dearly. And so now whenever I drive by this place, every time it's right by my house. And so driving by, I like look at it, and I'm just like, you did this to me. Like I can't let it go. And then I had a couple of meetings this week that were at Chick-fil-A. And so I walk into Chick-fil-A like I do with meetings throughout the week. And so I'm looking up at the menu, and it was at that moment that I realized that not only did it affect me with this one restaurant, but it affected me with God's chicken. And I was like, I was like, I think I might be blaspheming the Holy Spirit right now in this moment because I hate everything that I see on that movie, on that screen that is fried chicken. And I was like, I can't do Chick-fil-A. Like, I still can't right now. Like at the Paladuro trip, your boy didn't have Nope, not this time. No, thank you. And so it affected me with Chick-fil-A, which I think, Lord, forgive me. And just want to be clear, it wasn't Chick-fil-A. That's still Christian chicken, and the one that's blessed had manna from heaven. And so, but here's why I start with that. It's because tonight we're talking about bitterness. And so we're talking about bitterness, resentment, and unforgiveness. And I know it's a silly illustration, but just kind of like that memory of the fig Newtons, it still follows me. And to this day, I'm still bothered by them. That's how bitterness works. It follows you. That memory of the thing that happened to you, that you went through, sometimes a smaller thing even, sometimes and oftentimes a really big thing that follows you for decades. And sometimes the rest of people's lives. And if you don't do something about it, that's what bitterness is like. And just like whenever I went to Chick-fil-A, I realized that it affected my relationship with God's chicken. I realized that that's actually how bitterness kind of works and unforgiveness and resentment works. It bleeds into every one of your relationships, not some of them. It affects every single relationship that you have whenever you have and you are harboring bitterness and resentment. And so because of those reasons, what we are going into tonight is extremely crucial that we listen to God's word as it speaks to us on this topic, as we cover these issues and as we look to answer the question, how do I forgive the person that hurt me? How do I forgive the person that wronged me? And the truth is, we all struggle to forgive, right? Like, it can be small things, like small things that we just kind of hold on to the whole week, like this week. So this week, I got one of those texts with the exclamation point at the end. It's like, but it's not like a go you exclamation point or hoorah, yippee. It was none of that stuff. It wasn't like this is a good exclamation point. I was getting yelled at. And I was like, you ever got one of those where it's like, or they give you the all caps and you're like, okay. And you just kind of starts to eat at you and weigh on you. And so there's small things like that. Or have you ever had the moment like where you were saying everything that you want to say, and I mean like you are like passionately like pleading your case and your side of the argument, except the other person's actually not there and it's just you alone in the shower? And Anybody with me? Okay, so there's a few of us in here. I'm not alone. I'm not alone with my issues. But I've definitely had that moment. And so these are the smaller things. And then, of course, there's the bigger things. And I want to give you where this message is coming from because I wasn't planning on preaching on this, but I've had around a dozen one-on-one conversations with people that came to me and they wanted to talk with me after I shared, if you were here when I talked about living unstuck and how Trevor had lived unstuck now from pornography for years, and then I talked about how I have lived unstuck from unforgiveness towards my dad and bitterness towards my dad for a couple of years now, and I had people come and talk to me after that message, and they wanted to meet, and the question that they wanted to ask is, how do you forgive your dad? Because I want to walk and I want to be unstuck from that, but how do you forgive your dad? And I've had that conversation several times, and I just know that is another thought that people are thinking in this room that we haven't sat down at the coffee table. But I want you guys to have a chance to kind of sit in one of those conversations and hear what God has to say for how do you go about forgiving? Because I sat down with one person, and she said, honestly, I hate him. As we talked in the conversation, and then there was many others that sat down, and they said, I just don't know how to let go. And that's what we are diving into this evening. So I want us to kind of join one of those coffee tables and hear what God has to say. How do I forgive and how do I let go? And so before we talk about how, we have to talk about the why. And here's why in one statement: unforgiveness can't be compartmentalized. Resentment, bitterness, whatever word you want to say there, it cannot be compartmentalized. And Hebrews chapter 12, verse 14 and 15 is going to capture the heart of what I'm getting at. It says in verse 14 of Hebrews chapter 12, it says, strive for peace with everyone and for the holiness without which no one will see the Lord. See to it that no one fails to obtain the grace of God, that no root of bitterness springs up and causes trouble, and by it many become defiled. So it's this root of bitterness idea here, and it springs up, and it says, and it defiles many, not just the one relationship that it's towards, but it actually blows out to many things. And it's because when it is a root, it's like the root of a plant. That's the picture we're getting here in this verse. The root of a plant has a problem, the whole plant has a problem. If the root of a tree has a problem and an issue, the whole tree is often going to have massive issues and decay from within. And so that's what it means to have a root problem. So this for us is a heart issue that it bleeds into everything in our lives. And so whenever we have a thought like, oh, well, I'm only holding things against just that person. Whenever we think thoughts like that's what we are thinking, but that's not actually how it works. And it does end up affecting every one of your relationships and everything about you. And that's why this is such a crucial thing for us to unpack and jump into tonight. Like for me, when I think about some of the things I harbored and some of the resentment and the things that I was talking about whenever I was a young kid. The young kid waiting for his dad to pick him up just didn't show up, and I had all this bad temper started to happen in my life. Like I was a little kid that was always in the principal's office. Anybody else just want to be honest and just say like I was that kid? I have to be honest. Like, yeah, I was always in the principal's office. So yeah, you're welcome. You have issues as well. So cool. So we're learning about each other tonight, and so. And so I was always in the principal's office because I had a terrible anger issues, and I would fight just like if I thought that you were doing something wrong that I didn't like, we would end up fighting. Fight little kids, other little kids, not like a grown man fighting little kids. I'm like going into elementary school. I'm like, say something. No, this is whenever I was a little kid as well. Golly, that's so funny. I'm playing that in my mind right now. It's not funny, but it is if you like put it in an Office episode. Anyway. And so I'd always be in the principal's office, and I had this kind of rage that was in me, and then I noticed I've always had this jealousy issue that I'm always afraid somebody's going to leave me, and so I've been jealous, and I think about that, and I think, wow, a lot of that, I'm not going to attribute all of it, but a lot of that is because of and stems from the root of the unforgiveness and bitterness that I had in my life. And so for me, I look back on my life, and it's actually kind of astounding for me to look at and go, I had all these issues because of the bitterness and the resentment, and I didn't know how to put words to it then, but I've learned a lot now, and I can now. And for a lot of people, what happens, and whenever I was sitting across from people talking, and I would say, man, it really bleeds into your other relationships. And I say, a lot of people, they just kind of have great distrust for others. And it comes from that one person that hurt you, and their heads start nodding, and they're going, yeah, I see that everywhere in my life. And so it didn't take a lot of convincing for people as we started to have these conversations across coffee tables. And maybe for you right now, you're even having some realization going maybe that is why I have such great distrust of people, and you won't let others in as this defense mechanism. And I'll say this pretty much every time that I preach on the topic of unforgiveness or bring it up, because what happens is it's true. We try to raise this wall of defense, saying you're not going to hurt me again, and you is the person that hurt us. But we start to apply that just across the board to everybody. We don't let anybody else in, and then what happens is we start to become a very lonely person that has shallow relationships on the outside because we don't want to let anybody on the inside, and that defense mechanism, that wall that we raised up to protect us is actually building our own prisons that we live in. And that's what happens for people whenever they hold on to unforgiveness. And right alongside of that, you just start to kind of assume the worst about people, and you're waiting for people to fail you. Have you been there? This is something that we've seen over and over and over again. If not in your life, I've seen it in my life. You start to just apply across the board, waiting for everyone to fail you. And it causes a lot of issues, and these are in people's lives and in relationships where they didn't do anything wrong to you. And so what happens, and maybe you've heard it said, but it is another true statement, that unforgiveness is like drinking poison, hoping that the other person dies. That's what unforgiveness is like. And so it starts to bleed into and affect every relationship that we have in this world. And not only in this world horizontally, but it affects our relationship with God vertically. And actually, Matthew chapter 6, verse 15, Jesus is speaking here, one of these hard statements from Jesus, and this statement is reaffirmed in several places, but it says, if you do not forgive others their trespasses, neither will your Father forgive you yours. And so what Jesus is just saying there, what God is saying there is that your horizontal bitterness is actually going to put a block between you and God and the experience that you get to have of his forgiveness in your life. And Jesus isn't saying that you got to forgive or he's not going before you ever come to know him. That's not one of the, because it's Jesus plus nothing is salvation. But what he's saying is that if you are forgiven, then you will forgive. Forgiven people forgive people. And we're going to come back to that idea. But forgiven people forgive people is what he's getting at. But God doesn't want you to live like this. God doesn't want me to live like this and live in this resentment. And it can't be compartmentalized. And so what do we do? Well, I want to define forgiveness. One way in Scripture to define forgiveness, and the next point is this, is to forgive is to release. To forgive is to release. In Matthew chapter 18, verse 21 and 22, it says this, it says, then Peter came up and said to him, Lord, how often will my brother sin against me, and I forgive him? As many as 7 times? And so Peter here, he actually is one-upping what the Jewish tradition was. It was Jewish tradition to forgive up to 3 times, and then you don't have to forgive anymore was the common belief that time. So Peter's like, I know you, Jesus. Like, I know you're this big on grace guy and Messiah who came, and I see the way you interact with people who have sinned their whole entire lives. So let me up it for you. Let me double it, and then let me add 1 for good measure. And so he goes, 7? Like, am I good? Like, if he does it a 7th time, can I kill him? Like, is that where I draw the line? Let me know. Let me know. You let me know. And so he comes and he's saying, like, do I forgive up to 7 times? And then Jesus says to him something crazy that he would have been taken back by. He says, I do not say to you 7 times, but 77 times. Or in the Greek language, it can be said 70 times 7. And what Jesus is getting there is that you completely forgive every single time. That's what he's saying. He's saying that you're going to completely forgive every single time. And that word forgive used here in Matthew chapter 18 is the Greek word aphemi. Aphemi. And it means to send away, to let go. To send away, to let go. It's this giant rock that we've got to drop. And unforgiveness, it's one of those things that it's there in our lives because we're holding on. And sometimes it's the small thing, right? Like sometimes it's that like, what did you say about my mama? You're like, I'm going to hold on to that one. Don't worry. And if you're in Lubbock for a little over a year, many times because of college students, someone's going to cut you off in traffic, and you're like, no, he didn't. I think Rage Monster's coming out. Like for me, that's a place where I still struggle. Like I think I said to somebody, it's like, I don't want to fight the guy like that, like cut me off. I just want to get out, go knock on his window and say, hey, let's talk. Let's just have a conversation. We got about 2 minutes here at the red light. No, don't pull away. Let's just talk. And so we start these little things or that look. Any of y'all gotten that look from somebody? Y'all been like, if that girl looks at me like that one more time. And you think about it, right? You'll think about it the rest of the day and sometimes the rest of the week. Like you're laying down, going to sleep, and you're like, why'd she look at me like that? Like why? Why'd she have to look at me like that? And you have all these things like the person that just says that rude comment to you. And so you have all these little things that you're kind of juggling, and then you're going through your life. And then, of course, we have the big things, right? We have that thing that we kind of live with, that abuse that we went through. Part of my story, we have the person that should have been there for us that wasn't there, and we're kind of living our lives, walking into conversations and into relationships, and we want to know why we can't receive the love of God. We want to know why we can't receive the love from other people, and it's because our hands are full with our bitterness. Our hands are full with our unforgiveness. And man, this was me. This was me. I was walking around and I was talking to people about the love of God, shaking their hand, going, sorry, let me move it around. How you doing? God will forgive you and he'll set you free from anything. And God's like, Travis, what about the rock? And of course, it's not an actual rock, so I'm like, God, what are you talking about? I'm good. He goes, no, you have something that you're still carrying. And it was subtle for me. It wasn't like, if you asked me, like, do you hate your dad? I wouldn't have said no. I would have said, no, I love my dad. But then whenever my wife would say, hey, it's your dad's birthday, like something inside of me, like I would feel literal rage. And I would be like, why would I call him? He's never calling me. Why would I? And I would just kind of go off. And I'd be like, how dare you ask me to call my dad? And I was going, and God was saying, where'd that come from, Travis? And I realized, man, I was carrying this thing with me inside. And it was weighing me down. And this is how a lot of people live their lives. And when you're holding on to the big thing, the smaller things just start to pile on top of it. Because it becomes a lot easier to become bitter when you're bitter. You see what I'm saying? It's usually something that it progresses. And it spreads. And that's what happens. And what he's going to say is, listen, you don't have to hold on to the rock. You can let it go. You can release that. That's what that word means. The heart of the word aphemi is to release a person. And this is what God has called you to do. So the question that we have all got to answer is this, is will I release him? Will I release her? And maybe you have the thought that I had. Man, the person hurt me multiple times. This isn't just a one-time thing, though, so it's really easy. This isn't just the look. I can get over the look. This is something really serious. This is really heavy for me. And so how do I get past that if it's something that I'm dealing with over and over and over again that I've been through? And that's something that I was thinking is, man, it's not just a one-time thing. It was when, hey, Dad, you going to be at my game on Friday? Yeah, son, going to be at your game. Can't wait. And then he doesn't show up, and later on doesn't say anything to me about it. And I was like, hey, I wish you could have come to my game. Oh, yeah, I had work. I couldn't make it. And then whenever we had our first child and our second one, he said, hey, I'm coming to the baby shower. Just want to let you know I'm going to be there. We're going to celebrate. Didn't show up. And so this stuff happened over and over and over again, and Jesus is going to look at me, and he's going to pull up a chair. Spiritually, he's going to say, hey, 70 times 7, Travis. Choose to let it go. Choose to release. And I'm telling you, man, I have. And you can walk in the release that God has, because something that I learned is whenever you release them, you're the one that walks in freedom. That's something that I have learned firsthand. I've learned this. And I've also learned this. And a lot of us, we don't want to let go of things because of the void that person left there. That's one of the things that causes us to hold on to bitterness and the hurt is because of the void that's left by the hurt that person did to us. Know this, that God fills the role where others failed. And I experienced this firsthand as well. Many of our deepest wounds in our life, many of the deepest things that we deal with in our lives are connected to people who were supposed to be reliable. They were supposed to be present. They were supposed to be supportive and loving, but yet they were not. And actually, many times they did the opposite. Guys, I want to let you know just what kind of people I sit across from and other people in our ministry sit across from. We have people that sometimes on a weekly basis who have been abused in their life, physically, sexually, and then every single year I talk with people who have actually been sexually abused by even a parent and a close family member. I mean, that's a tough thing. And it's very, very, very difficult to forgive whenever someone has hurt you that way because of the void that is left in a person whenever someone hurts them that way. But there's a powerful, powerful concept about what Jesus does. Jesus comes in and he can actually take those broken pieces that are there, that void, that gap that is there. God says, I will come and I will fill it, and I will fill the role that your dad couldn't. For me, it was the role of father. And I have a stepdad who's a great man. But if you have a stepdad and you've been hurt by your biological father, know that it's okay that you have a good stepdad, but that role of father still left a gap in your heart because that was the person that was supposed to be there, and they weren't. Or your mom, or whoever it might be, your friend, your uncle, whoever it might be for you. But for me, it was my dad. And so some verses that I realized about God, that these things are very, very, very true. Whenever I came to know Jesus and I surrendered my life to him, it was a really powerful moment because I realized that God had released me and forgiven me from all the sin I'd ever done. And I felt like this massive weight just lift off of me, freedom in Jesus. But also quickly in that moment, I also realized that God was stepping into my life to fill the role of father. And he truly is the dad that I needed in my life. And Galatians chapter 4, verse 6 says this. It says, and because you are sons, God sent the Spirit of his Son into our hearts, meaning when God sees you, he sees Jesus. And it says, crying, Abba, Father. Abba, Father. In Romans chapter 8, verse 15, it says, for you did not receive the spirit of slavery to fall back into fear, but you have received spirit of adoption as sons, by whom we cry, Abba, Father. That word, Abba, is a hard word to translate and understand in the English language, but I'll give you a picture. Whenever I come home right now, my little 1-year-old Cassie, she can hardly run without falling, and she got these short, chubby, little chunky legs. But when she sees me, literally, like if she's down the hall, like she sprints as much as she can, like leans her head forward and just kind of runs towards me. And she comes and she lifts her hands up, and then I pick her up, and she'll put her head on my shoulder and she'll just give me big old hugs right now, and I love it. That's the idea of coming to God as Abba. That we get to be like that with the God of the universe, that we get to be like that with our Father in heaven. And he fills that role. Psalms chapter 68, verse 5 is one of the most powerful verses when it comes to God filling a role where others fail. It says, Father of the fatherless and protector of widows is God in his holy habitation. God is the Father of the fatherless, and those that have lost someone and are in hurt, he's there. Those who have been abandoned, he's there for them. He's close to those people. And it's not just Father, Jesus' friend. Whatever it is for you, he fills the role where others failed. So if you write things down, write this down. And if you just put this, God fills where blank failed. God fills in your notes or in your heart, like write this down, like God fills where blank failed, and insert that blank with the person that failed you. And realize that God is a God who stands in the gap. He's a God who is the friend that never fails. He's present when others are absent, and he is the healer when others have wounded. He fills the voids caused by others, and when you have that void filled in your heart, it's so much easier to let go of the weight and the rocks. And then the next thing is a very practical step that is just straight up commanded by Jesus and calling to us is that we would pray for the person that hurt you. Pray for the person that hurt you. In Matthew chapter 5, verse 43 and 44, Jesus is speaking and says, you have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. And we hear that and it's kind of like, okay, I pray, okay. There's a song that it's actually really catchy, and Carrie and I have jammed out to it many a time, but it's by, I think it's Jaron Lowenstein, but it's called Pray For You. I want to read the lyrics, just a little comedic relief. He starts out with this. It says, I haven't been to church since I don't remember when. Things were going great until they fell apart again. So I listened to the preacher as he told me what to do. He said, you can't go hating others who have done wrong to you. Sometimes we get angry, but we must not condemn. Let the good Lord do his job. You just pray for them. So here you're like, oh man, it's like a spiritual song. And then he says, I pray your brakes go out running down a hill. I pray a flower pot falls from a windowsill and knocks you in the head like I'd like to. I pray your birthday comes and nobody calls. I pray you're flying high when your engine stalls. I'm like, dang. I pray all your dreams never come true. Just know wherever you are, honey, I pray for you. That's clever. That's clever. Terrible. And not how you pray. That's literally the only point that I'm making from that. You don't pray like that. This guy's got some serious bitterness issues. But seriously, I can honestly say for my dad, like I pray that my dad experiences the grace of Jesus that I have experienced. Like I love my dad. I pray that he can experience the freedom from the weight that he carries and some of the bitterness that he carries, because one thing that I've learned about my dad is that he was actually beat by his dad. So you want to talk about a rock that you carry around spiritually, that this is what my dad does. And he doesn't have the love of God in his life like I do. And so as I've prayed, I've realized these things about my dad. And as I've prayed for him, my compassion for my father has actually grown. And so it doesn't mean that like he didn't actually hurt me still and I can just let it go and it's not a big deal. No, that's not what it means to forgive. Actually, part of forgiveness is acknowledging just how big of a deal it is in your heart. And it still holds the same weight in that sense that it's still a very massive thing that happened to you and the hurt is still very real. And there's nothing wrong with acknowledging that. But at the same time, my compassion for my dad, just for me, as I start to pray for him, often I pray for him. He's written on my prayer wall to pray for him. And as I pray for him, my compassion for him grows because I've realized this about people who hurt people, is they've usually been hurt. And the statement, hurt people is true. People that have been hurt usually hurt others. And so as you start to pray for somebody, your perspective will start to change, and God will start to do a work in your heart. And that's the next point that we see, in that if that scripture teaches us that we can have a new perspective on our pain that we've been through in this life. So the next point is get a new perspective on your pain. That we can have this new perspective as we go through our lives. Philippians chapter 1, verse 12 through 14 kind of captures this idea. It's Paul, he's in prison. He says this, I want you to know, brothers, that what has happened to me has really served to advance the gospel, so that it has become known throughout the whole imperial guard and to all the rest that my imprisonment is for Christ. And most of the brothers, having become confident in the Lord by my imprisonment, are much more bold to speak the word without fear. So he is in prison, a time where if anybody, and he has been beaten, and he has been shipwrecked, and there's all kinds of things that Paul has went through in his life. He has a lot of good reason that we would agree in a circle, if we were in a circle with him, and he was saying all the reasons why he had resentment, and he was saying, why God, why God, why God? I think a lot of us would be like, yeah, I would think I might ask the same question. But his shift happened. There's a perspective switch that we see here in this passage, that he quit asking, why did this happen to me? That's a natural thing to ask. And I'm not saying that he never asked this question, but I think he quit just asking, why did this happen to me? And he switched to saying, how can God use this? A lot of people, they just stop at why did this happen to me? But I think there's a perspective here that he realizes that God is using his imprisonment to spread the gospel. So instead of just saying why God's sitting there in chains, he's actually going, okay, how God? How are you going to use this? And he starts to share the gospel with the very ones who are imprisoning him. And he says that I have this perspective. It's not just why, but it's how, God, are you going to use this? Man, if you get that, there's such a powerful thing that's going to happen in your life. You're going to start living in the freedom and purpose of God for you. And whenever I think of someone who has had God take what was broken and those shards and take it and built a beautiful mosaic that's amazing, I think about Christine Kane. Christine Kane is a traveling evangelist who speaks all across the world, but she also started something called the A21 campaign. But a little bit of her story, when she shares, she often shares her testimony, and she talks about how she was sexually abused for years in her life. Sexually abused for years, and so she was at a place where she was really low, and she was asking the why God question, just like pretty much everybody does. But instead of staying there, God did a work in her life, and she started saying, how are you going to use this, God? And so she decided that she was going to start the A21 campaign, which is an organization that frees women who have been sex slaves and trafficked. And so these people who were sex trafficked, and in 2018, the report that came out said that 300, this is because of the organization that started by this woman who could have just stopped at why and been angry and bitter her whole life, but instead she said how, and because of that, in 2018, 300 victims of sex trafficking were freed because of this organization. That's crazy. 300 victims were freed in Jesus' name. God took a very negative thing, and only he can do that, and he can take it, and he can set someone free, and he can take that and even use it for his purposes and his message through your life and through my life. And a lot of the deepest connections I have with people, even through times whenever I'm preaching, but certainly my people whenever I'm talking with them, is through some of the hardest things that I've been through in my life that God has taken, and he's used that as leverage for his glory. And God didn't want that to happen. God hates that those things happen, but God will use it as leverage for his glory, and he will use it in your life for his mission. And he did it through Christine Kane, and she shares that message. She's a beacon of light. and it came out of something that was very dark. I was meeting with a guy a couple of weeks ago, and this is something really practical on how do you get a new perspective, specifically talking towards bitterness, because Paul's talking about just leveraging all this for the gospel and what he's going through. But with the things that have happened where we have been hurt by others, what's one practical way that you can get this new perspective? As I've sat across from people, there's been a couple of light bulb moments whenever I've said this, so I think it might be practical and helpful for us tonight. And so if you would, take not here now, but when you get alone, take a sheet of paper and draw a line down the middle, and then start to write all the things that that person did to hurt you. And be specific and say what was it that really hurt you. And then on the other side, write down how you are going to use that as a teacher for a person that you're never going to be. Because as I've looked at my father, I've learned a lot from him. I've used my dad as a teacher, and I'm saying you can use the person that hurt you as a teacher. Like my dad not being in my life, I'm going to be present. Something that I would write down. My dad not keeping his word, I'm going to try to ruthlessly keep my word. My dad being an addicted to alcohol, I'm committed to not falling down that lineage that's on that side of the family for me. My dad holding on to guilt. My dad told me because of all the guilt that he held on to, and I struggled with holding on to guilt for years in my life. Almost got out of ministry at one point because I was holding on to so much guilt because I thought that God would never use a man like me. And my dad holds on to guilt, and he said, I can't even read my Bible. I can't read the Bible you got me, son. I can't read the devotional you got me, son. And I said, why? And he said, because I'm so guilty because of this. And he held up his beer can. And I'm committed that I will walk and I will live in the grace of Jesus that is freely given to all of us. I've used my father as a teacher. And you can use the person that hurt you most. You can use that person as a teacher in your life for what you're not going to be. And there's a powerful thing that happens when you do that. You take a very negative thing, you flip it on its head, and watch God use it. And the reason why I can do that is because I've experienced the forgiveness of Jesus in my own life. That's why I can have this perspective, and that's why you can have this perspective. And so the last point is this. Going on the forgiveness of Jesus. Experiencing Jesus' forgiveness for you leads to experiencing Jesus' forgiveness through you. It's a powerful truth. In Ephesians chapter 4, verse 32, it says, be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, as God in Christ forgave you. That verse is just another way to say the statement that I just said. When you experience God's forgiveness, you are freed to forgive. You have the freedom to forgive like no one in this world can that doesn't know Jesus. When Jesus was on a cross, man, the forgiveness of Christ is powerful. When Jesus was on the cross, he says that word, ephemi. He says that word, release them. So he had all kinds of things that he could have held against us to hold on to something and to pin someone against the wall with something. This word, ephemi, it means to release them from being pinned against the wall from those things, to drop the things that are weight that we could have thrown against somebody. This word, ephemi, is what Jesus says as he is on the cross and he is dying. In Luke chapter 23, verse 33 and 34, it says, and when they came to the place that is called the skull, and they crucified him. Jesus is in his last breath dying, and the criminals, one on his right and one on his left. Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Father, forgive them. Man, who was he thinking about? He was thinking about the people that were mocking him. He was thinking about the people that spit in his face. He was thinking about the people that drove the stakes through his wrists and his ankles. He was thinking about the people that were in the crowd that were laughing as it happened. He was thinking about the criminals that were next to him that were heaping insults on him as they were dying, rightfully so. And him, as an innocent person, the most innocent one who has ever been, he's sitting there and he's saying, like, what does he do? Not only was he thinking about them, he was thinking about you. He was thinking about me. He was thinking about the times that I decided that I wanted nothing to do with God, and I told him out loud that I wanted nothing to do with him, and I ran to all kinds of things that I thought would bring me satisfaction in my life, but left me to a dump with nothing, empty. He was thinking about me. He was thinking, what is God's response to that? What is God's response when he has so much that dirt that he could throw on us, man. So many things that he could have used to pin me against the wall. And he says, I don't hold it against Travis because I'm holding it against myself. Jesus does not hold your sin against you because he held it against himself. He absorbed to great cost to himself, the greatest cost. He absorbed all of God's wrath in that moment, holding our sins against himself. And man, I'm telling you, it's such a powerful thing to realize that Jesus is going, now what? And he goes, I forgive you. I free you. I release you. It's for freedom that Christ set you free. You can walk in freedom, man. I'm telling you, if you do not know Jesus and you think, man, I don't know if this God will want someone like me, I'm telling you that God will forgive you. I don't know if God will forgive someone like me. I'm telling you, God will forgive you. He will release you tonight, and you can walk in freedom. I am forgiven is a statement that I can say loud and proud, and it's true. I'm forgiven, and that hit me so hard whenever I'd come back to Christ after I'd ran from him, that actually back in the day when MySpace was a thing, I know I'm old, and back in the day when MySpace was a thing, I changed my name to Forgiven. And I shared my testimony to everyone that would read it. But the identity that I had and the new identity that I was walking in was for forgiven. And my identity had changed because that's what defined me and that's what defines me. And if you are a Christian, you can say, I am forgiven. Actually, can we just say that? Will you say, I am forgiven? Welcome to Sinners Anonymous. Say it again. Say, I am forgiven. You are. That's your identity. Now let me ask you something. If forgiven is who you are, and it is. If forgiven, if you can say, my name is forgiven. If forgiven is who you are, then what do? You forgive. It actually doesn't make any sense to say my name is forgiven, yet I don't forgive. It makes zero sense for a Christian to not release others, because we have been forgiven and it identifies us now. C.S. Lewis says it like this. He says, to be a Christian means to forgive the inexcusable because God has forgiven the inexcusable in you. And as we close, my brother, whenever I was little, my brother came in and he was screaming and crying, and he was holding his wrist, and my mom was there, and I was standing right beside him thinking, what's going on? I thought like maybe his wrist was broken or something, but he was crying. He was like, it hurts, it hurts, it hurts. And she goes, well, let me see. And he walks over to my mom, and he opens up where he had been cupping a wasp that was just stinging him over and over and over again. And the reason why I share that is because that's what a lot of people are doing when they're holding on to resentment and unforgiveness and bitterness. They're holding on to something, and it is stinging you over and over and over again. And God is saying, hey, would you let go and let me see it? And whenever he did that, my mom knocked it off and gave him the ointment that would start to heal him, and the healing process began. And this is what God does for us whenever we come to him and we finally let go, and God says, let me see it, let me do what I can only do. And we go, and he goes, you have been letting this thing sting you long enough. I'm going to let the forgiveness go away now. And you can let Jesus step in and let the healing process begin. This is what happens. Let's pray. God, if people don't know you, Jesus, I pray that they would realize what you have for their lives. As a matter of fact, if you do not know Jesus in here, and you feel like God is calling you to surrender your life to him, you can just simply pray this prayer to God in your heart. You can just say that, Jesus, I know it was my sins that you died for, and I accept your forgiveness into my heart. Thank you for releasing me and freeing me. I turn to you as my Lord and my Savior. Jesus will save you in your seat if you pray those words to him from your heart and you mean them. But maybe you're here tonight and you are harboring bitterness towards somebody, and I want us to just pray in your heart a 4-word prayer. It's simply this. It's, God, I release. And in your heart, say the name of the person that has hurt you. God, I release the person. As we go into a time of worship, there's a prayer team in the back ready to pray with us, pray with you.